Some of the wildest stories in war cinema aren't from blockbusters like The Great Escape. They're from films the FBI tried to shut down, movies banned by governments, and productions where Burt Lancaster nearly killed himself crashing real trains. These are 10 old war movies that still hold up in 2025. When you talk about war movies that just get right to the point, Hell in the Pacific is one of the best. John Boorman directs, and he keeps it stripped down. Two men, one American, Lee Marvin, one Japanese, Toshiro Mifune, stuck on a deserted island in the middle of World War II. No one else, no subtitles, barely any dialogue. At first, it's just pure hostility. They won't even share water. But as starvation and exhaustion start to set in, survival takes over, and the whole thing turns into a kind of existential parable. What makes it even wilder is that both Marvin and Mifune had actually served in World War II, on opposite sides, of course. And Boorman, who later made Deliverance, just lets these guys rage at each other, then figure it out. Just watching these two icons together is a real treat if you're into pure acting. Samuel Fuller was a newspaperman turned filmmaker. Then he went to war, and after that he brought all of it back to his movies. The Steel Helmet was the very first American film about the Korean War, shot just 6 months after the fighting started. It was filmed in only 10 days on a budget of about $100,000. The Chinese tank is literally made of plywood. That's how low the budget was. But what you get is just pure first-hand experience. Fuller didn't pull punches. There's a scene where an American soldier kills an unarmed prisoner, another where a Japanese-American GI talks about his parents being sent to internment camps. At the time, all this was political dynamite. The McCarthy Red Scare was in full swing, and this movie got Fuller and his lead actor Gene Evans actually investigated by the FBI for supposed pro-communist propaganda. The movie went on to influence a ton of directors. Martin Scorsese even called Fuller one of the bravest and most moral artists in movies. Ashes and Diamonds is what you get when a war movie refuses to pick a side. Set at the very end of World War II, it's all about the chaos that comes when one war ends and another, this time political, begins. German occupation is finished, but now the Polish resistance and the Soviets are fighting to take over. The movie's got a dreamlike quality, with cinematography straight out of Citizen Kane. At the time, Polish authorities didn't want this thing seen outside the country. It took a random official sneaking a print to Venice for it to get any real international attention. Since then, it's become a legend. Part nightmare, part political allegory, part coming-of-age story. It's one of Martin Scorsese's all-time favorites. He showed it to DiCaprio while making The Departed just to get that sense of moral confusion, and Francis Ford Coppola loves it too. Before Billy Wilder made Stalag 17, he cranked out this desert thriller in 1943. It's got Francho Tone undercover as a British officer, Anne Baxter as the hotel manager, and Erich von Stroheim chewing the scenery as Rommel. The whole plot is basically a series of close calls. British soldier passes himself off as a hotel waiter, gets mistaken for a German spy, and tries to figure out a way to sabotage Rommel's plans in North Africa. What makes it especially interesting is how much of it was based on real, current events. The movie was shot and released just months after the real Battle of El Alamein, and they even used actual combat footage from the fighting. British Army Major David P.J. Lloyd was brought on as a consultant because he'd actually fought in the Desert Campaign. The movie scored 3 Oscar nominations, just like Stalag 17 would a decade later, and Quentin Tarantino calls it one of the best war movies ever made. One of my favorite war stories, hands down. It's not a credible Rommel, but it's a fantastic version of Rommel. Now, if you want to see old-school stunt work with actual danger, Burt Lancaster's The Train is it. The story is all about a French resistance plot to stop the Nazis from stealing a trainload of art. Sounds simple, but the production itself was just on another level. They crashed real trains for this movie. No models, no special effects. The director, John Frankenheimer, admitted later it was a miracle no one got killed. Lancaster was 50 at the time, did all his own stunts, and ended up wrecking his knee so bad production had to shut down for 2 weeks. He put off surgery just to finish the movie. Frankenheimer, Lancaster, and crew were basically obsessed with making every shot as real as possible. Even the bombing of the rail yard was done with real dynamite. French rail authorities needed to widen the track anyway, so they just filmed it. The movie didn't make its money back in the US. Cost $6.7 million, made about $3 million here. But what you get is one of the most intense war films of the 60s. Everyone walked away with scars, literally. American, British, and Australian prisoners in a Japanese camp just trying to survive. The honesty in this movie is staggering. James Clavell wrote the novel based on his own time as a prisoner in Changi Prison. It's a harsh, cynical look at how people really act when everything falls apart, and it doesn't sugarcoat anything. Not surprisingly, the film didn't go over well in some places. The portrayal of British officers, the relentless misery, some countries outright banned it. And in America, people just ignored it. Vietnam was still being sold as the clean war back then, and nobody wanted to see something this raw. The marketing didn't help either. Sold it as a standard war movie, when in reality it was anything but. The director, Brian Forbes, said it best. It had no happy or heroic ending and said some unpopular things about the American dream. The real audience, the audience for whom it was intended, stayed away. Most people know Steve McQueen from The Great Escape, but The Sand Pebbles is the one that sits in the background as one of his most interesting war films. Set in 1925 Shanghai, this movie goes big with scope and detail. Robert Wise directs, and McQueen gives one of his best performances, but making it wasn't easy. Behind the scenes, McQueen clashed constantly with Wise, dragged his feet on filming, and didn't like the script changes. He took method acting to the extreme, which drove everyone nuts. There was also plenty of gossip about off-screen affairs and his rocky marriage, which only added to the tension on set. But all that mess resulted in a movie that really holds up. Kevin Costner called it a perfect war movie and said once it was the film that made movies expand for him, the history, the world building, just the sheer scale of it. It's a war movie with a real sense of place, and McQueen just owns every frame. Go Tell the Spartans is one of those movies that quietly does its job and moves on. Directed by Ted Post, starring Burt Lancaster, it's set in 1964 Vietnam, back when the U.S. was still just advisors. Based on Daniel Ford's novel Incident at Muc Wa, the film is all about moral ambiguity. No heroics, no big battles, just a bunch of men in a hopeless situation, trying to figure out what any of it means. This one took years to get made. The screenwriter, Wendell Mays, wrote it in 1971 after buying the rights himself because every studio was too scared to touch it. Money ran out before filming finished, and Burt Lancaster basically stepped in and put up his own cash just to get it across the finish line. He even took a pay cut. When it finally came out, critics praised it, but audiences just didn't care. Maybe too soon, maybe too bleak. Lancaster later said he thought it was a marvelous movie, not the greatest ever, but important for what it said about Vietnam in a microcosm. Still, he knew most people would move on and forget it. Sometimes that's just what happens. Attack on the Iron Coast is a British-made war film starring Lloyd Bridges as a Canadian commando officer leading a raid on a Nazi-controlled dockyard. It's based on real events, specifically Operation Chariot, which was one of the gutsiest missions of World War II. The real raid involved 622 men, and 169 of them were killed. It was a combined British Army and Royal Navy operation aimed at the Nazi-controlled dockyard in France. This is the kind of movie that got completely buried because it wasn't flashy. No big Hollywood budget, no sweeping score, no giant battlefield set pieces. What it does have is a ton of tension, a tight structure, and a focus on strategy over spectacle, which honestly makes it feel way more grounded than half the war movies people still talk about. Wrapping up with a classic, 12 O'Clock High. Gregory Peck leads as a tough general taking over a bomber unit during World War II, pushing his men through daylight raids over Nazi Germany and occupied France. This isn't a glory mission movie, it's all about the mental toll, discipline, and the relentless grind of air war. The attention to detail is something else. They even paid stunt pilot Paul Mantz a record $4,500 to crash land a B-17 for the cameras. At the time, nobody had ever paid that much for a single stunt. The military was so impressed they made this movie required viewing at service academies for decades. It's ambitious, intense, and one of those films that actually changed how Hollywood thought about war stories. Still worth watching today, 100%.